when you're chasing growth metrics and, they're thinking about a 10x return here, it's not good enough to even be growing at 50% a year. And look, that's really hard to maintain. There's still very good businesses out there that are growing each year at 40, 50%. And maybe they're happier founders. I don't know.
From the Advancing Women in Tech podcast, this series on female founders highlights their unique ways of stumbling into the startup world, the companies they're currently building, and what they've learned along the way.
I'm Sydney Mary, and today we're talking with Heidi Holmes, an entrepreneur who saw a gap in mentorship and teamed up with her best friend to fix it through their solution called Mentorloop, where they make connections accessible. Heidi Holmes and Llyod set out to create Mentorloop in 2016, but before that, Heidi had started another business. It had a good run and then fizzled out, but the experience was a great learning lesson and a building block towards what her and Lucy are building today.
So yes, I have had a business before Mentorloop, which was a business called AWIT, which was an online job board for mature age workers. And, not a success story, but I always look back fondly on that experience because I think it wasn't necessarily a failure, but I think from that experience I took a lot of lessons and it made me think about changes I wanted to make in terms of the next venture I went into, which was inevitably Mentorloop.
So can you speak a little bit more about some of the lessons that you learned? Because you built a store in your head. Wow, they're building something so cool. And this was their first try. They're one in a million or whatever store you want to build. And like you said, it wasn't necessarily a huge success story, but clearly you learned a lot from it. So can you kind of share maybe some of the things that you learned that have transferred into Mentorloop?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first thing was around just establishing the business. So with AdAge, I was a sole founder. I was bootstrapping. I was, any money I made went back into the business. So, it wasn't drawing a wage. So it was just, there was a lack of accountability. And I think with that was really being in it all by myself as well. So one thing I took away moving into the next venture I wanted to do is that I saw a huge amount of value in having a co-founder to share the journey with. And that wasn't just about the layer of accountability. It was about having, complementary and differing skill sets and just having someone in it to share the load with you as well. I saw huge value in that because that was a real struggle with my first business. That would definitely be one of the biggest ones. And the second one was around the business model. So with AdAge, it was a job board. It was about high volume, low value transactions. And it was just a tough market. You're very susceptible to, macroeconomic conditions. And so, this was back in 2009 that I started that venture. I wasn't really aware of the world of SaaS. And so as I sort of saw that become more popular and saw how, the mechanics of that business model worked, I could see huge value in the next venture being in more of the B2B space. And that was, I guess, where my skill set had lied as well, coming from working at KPMG. I'd worked in that B2B space previously when I was sort of, had a proper job. So yeah, the other thing was thinking about how am I going to make money? I think with my first venture, it was driven, with a lot of vision and mission, but I hadn't, married that to how am I going to make money? I just thought it was going to magically sort of happen and people were going to discover me and keep using it. And so, the next thing with Mentorloop was very much at the start, we sat down and we were like, how are we going to make money? Who is actually going to pay for this? Who is our buyer? And what's the pain point we're really solving for here? So just that high level articulation of that before kind of, jumping all in on the idea.
Many founders skip that step. If there's anything to be learned about entrepreneurship and founding, one of the key things is that who you're helping might not actually be your buyer. And finding ways to get your product to your customer through way of a different buyer is something you need to master if that's part of your business model.
Our model is about working with organizations. So it could be, a company. We also work with industry associations, non-for-profits, community groups, and that has always been, a pillar to our business model as well. Our mission is to make mentoring more accessible to more people. Mm-hmm. And so part of that, it's around, using software as a way to, bring mentoring to more people and help bring people in off the sidelines. And with that, accessible from a price point as well. So that's how we're able to work with different organizations. And, for us, we don't necessarily view the individual mentoring relationship as a paid engagement. We don't think that that's right. That's kind of something different to us. We kind of view that as coaching when there's a financial incentive there. And so what we're doing is we're working with organizations and they're essentially our customer. And Mentorloop makes it easier for them to activate their communities, bring knowledge in off the sidelines, and help make those connections either within that company or within that community.
As you kind of drill down on who your target consumer is, like who will be paying for this, were there groups of individuals or different types of companies where you're like, that could be our target audience, but we're not going to make them that because this is our business model? Because I think that it can be kind of hard for, I guess, founders who are looking to either find product market fit or find your buyer. Like there can always be like a number of buyers, but like you're going for one in particular.
Look, I think it's something we still struggle with today. And I think this comes back to, as a founder, you're naturally optimistic and ambitious, and so I think when we look at mentoring, we can say mentoring is relevant to every single person in the world. Everyone's a customer. So, we've had moments where we're like, everything's an opportunity and we'll demo the product to anyone that wants to talk to us. And, over time, we've definitely had, more of a focus. And I think back to what helped us do that, because we struggled to think about a particular industry or a particular, person within a company. We do sell to HR people at companies, but we also sell to membership coordinators at industry bodies, So what we actually turned to, which worked for us, was the jobs to be done framework. And so that was thinking about, okay, if we have these 4 buyer personas, so an HR leader, a membership coordinator, a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what is the thing, is their biggest pain point that they're working on, and how can then mentoring intersect with that? Because our buyer wasn't necessarily thinking about mentoring. Yes, we had those people that would find us, and that all makes sense, and that's great. But we needed to find ways that we could engage through content with other people about how we could solve their other problems that they might be experiencing when they may not have actually thought about mentoring. And so that framework really helped tighten up a lot of our go-to-market in terms of our marketing, our content strategy. And, it's something we still sort of use as a lens today. This year, we've released a new product called Mentorloop Pro, which is a self-serve product. And for us, again, with this new product, we've had to go back and revisit this strategy of who is our buyer. And, we kind of went into this thinking it's a team lead, it's someone that just wants to get started. And, that's played true. But we also realized the other day that this is actually, we've got 3 months of data and we need to go back and actually look at that and actually identify who is this buyer of this new product we've got. So I think it's a good reminder for all founders or business owners that it's something you need to constantly revisit. And it's not something that, you sort of consciously think about. It's often when maybe there's an issue or something feels off that you go back and look at it. But I think, it's a good exercise to remind yourself and your team, who is our buyer, who are we selling to, and who's the focus right now, and does that make sense?
I also love the fact that your platform is built for people who don't necessarily have like all of the resources to go and find these mentors themselves. Like, I think you guys have been quoted saying like, it was for the people who had it, and now we are giving it to kind of like the have-nots, people who didn't necessarily have these expansive networks, but also making it asynchronous. And so I think prior to you guys kind of coming on the scene, mentorship felt like it was like quite a process. You need to find this person, you need to have individual time with them. It kind of needs to be face to face or over Zoom. Like everyone's schedules have to align. You guys have made it now asynchronous. What have been the challenges of kind of building something like that? Because from what I believe, you guys were not technical when you started.
So I guess early on, Lucy, my co-founder, and I, we sat down and kind of had this vision for it. And as I mentioned, it was about a B2B SaaS model. And so what we identified early is that people that would be paying for this, the pain we could solve for was around the admin burden. So people that were running mentor programs were using spreadsheets and emails. We were like, well, that's something we can get an MVP up on, and that's something we can solve and test and see if that's going to, help someone out with their day to day. And so you're right, like we're not technical founders, but Luce actually had a background in digital marketing and had worked on, I guess, managing projects around digital design. So she had some experience with wireframing, and so she was able to sort of wireframe up an initial design. And then we engaged a local code shop to help us build the initial product and get an MVP up. And they remained our partners until we eventually bought tech in-house, which we have our own developers in-house here, headquartered in Melbourne now. So yeah, it was a kind of an iterative process in the beginning. But yeah, I guess we're doing this back in sort of 2015. The access to the talent and I guess the code shop we were also doing it at a time where it was probably a bit more accessible in terms of the hourly rates that we were getting charged as well.
I think it's interesting that you guys you build slow, obviously. Like you said, at one point tech was not in-house, now it's in-house. You got to build. And so when did you guys go full time with this?
So we initially bootstrapped, and I guess another learning I took from my first experience is I wasn't going to just try and personally fund this business venture. So Lucy and I made a commitment that, we were going to both contribute equal amount of money. We wanted to be 50-50 partners in this business. And eventually we saw a pathway that we wanted to get a proof of concept up, prove that people would pay for it, and then use that to go and have conversations with investors and see if we could get sort of an initial seed round up. So that was kind of the first milestone we were working towards. And so we both put in, I think it was 20 or 30 grand each. And that went to building the initial MVP and a little bit of marketing. And yeah, like we weren't paying ourselves at this point. So we were just sort of, it was a side hustle. And we agreed that once we got to that point of getting that initial seed round up, if we were able to close that was going to be the point that we go full time. Mm-hmm. And so up until that point, yeah, it was a lot of weekends. It was a lot of after work. And you make it happen, you get your hustle on, and we still kind of worked like this to this day. Was very focused on the design, the build, working with the engineers and project managing that. And I was out hitting the streets selling to try and get that first customer. And look, we still kind of operate like that today, but I think that also helped us early on in that we had a clear delineation in our roles and responsibilities, and we had an articulation of what was this first milestone. And that was this point that, we really had to jump in and commit. And so, after we got our 3 paying customers, we went out and got a little seed round up. And, we'd never done that before. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we cobbled together, what we refer to as a bit of a party round where, we never were able to get a lead investor, but, everyone was just like, oh, maybe I like the sound of this, but I'm not too sure. So, we got that first round up, which I think was about $300,000. And that was that point that we were all in. And then it was about working to the next milestone, which obviously of having investors involved, is really more about that growth story.
As female founders, how was that process? Because it's, no secret that women struggle to get funding, not because they're not wonderful, but just because sometimes investors aren't comfortable with it. So how is that for you guys?
To this day, we've done 3 rounds, and the last one was a bridge round during COVID. And so we were gearing up to do a Series A, and then COVID hit, and we just probably, we weren't hot enough for that sort of market to get a Series A up, but we got a bridge up with our existing investors. And after that, we made a call that we were tracking the profitability, and we recognized that raising money wasn't necessarily our skill set. And what we were better at is running a business. And also we wanted to be, which is one of our values, masters of our own destiny. And so for us at that point, it was about, we didn't want to, yes, growth is important, but we didn't want growth at the cost of the product development roadmap. And so when you're raising money and you're thinking about this next round, look, not always, but sometimes it can feel like you're on this hamster wheel. And so you've got to meet these metrics and these KPIs to get to this next raise. That's great for investors, but it doesn't mean you're building the right things for your customers, you know? And so for us, it was an opportunity for us to kind of not break free from our investors, but just go, okay, you know, we're going to go to profitability. This is the business that we want to build. And it allowed us to sort of free up some headspace in terms of the things that really mattered to our customers and us in terms of where we wanted to take the product. What we bring to the table is that it's not the common story where you have a lead investor and 2 other VCs jump on board. As I mentioned, like what we've been good at is running party rounds. And so I think we've got about 25 people on our cap table. You know, some of those are private individuals that have put a bit of their superannuation or their retirement savings into it. So it might have been 10 or 15 or 20 grand here or there. We've got a couple of VCs that have jumped on board as well through the process. And so how we've run these rounds is typically like putting out an expression of interest, having, you know, the 200 conversations you've got to have to get, you know, one yes. And for us, because we never, I guess, were able to secure this lead that was always just willing to back us, it was a very lengthy process for us. And we realized that we were spending a lot of time not, you know, outside the business. You're not working on the business when you're running a fundraising round. So it can be very distracting. And for us, it just got to this point where it didn't really make sense for us to continue down that pathway. And, you know, I think there's an element of, yes, we could do it. We raised money, but we are better at just running a profitable, sustainable business. I think that's what it comes down to.
Did you hear that? A profitable and sustainable business in lieu of fundraising. We hear about startups that reach unicorn status and those growing at an exponential pace, but we never truly hear about sustainability. Heidi brings up a good point. While it would be great to be a company that can commit to exceptional returns that investors are more than happy to partner in, sometimes that calls sustainability into question. It also can come at the expense of creating the solution that drove you to start the business in the first place.
When you're chasing growth metrics and, you know, they're thinking about a 10x return here, you know, it's not good enough to even be growing at 50% a year. And look, that's really hard to maintain. And I think, you know, we read a lot in the media about kind of these success stories and these growth stories and these big rounds. That is the exception. You know, underneath that, there's still very good businesses out there that are growing each year at, you know, 40, 50%. And maybe they're happier founders. I don't know.
That's a good point, though.
But I think, you know, to maintain that level of growth, the double, triple, like it is a very difficult thing to do. And, you know, I think it does come at some cost. And that might be the workload, the stress, or also, you know, moving your business in a direction that you've just got to keep feeding the fire. Yeah, I think, and as I said, it's not always, but I think, you know, for us as well, what we were kind of focused on was how do we just hit this next milestone, this next growth target. And it was just about kind of doing what we were continually doing and trying to do more of that. But that wasn't necessarily the thing that was actually going to get us to this next level that we needed to. It was almost like stepping back and thinking when we didn't have to think about growth rate allowed us to actually think about in 2-3 years time, where do we want to be and how are we going to get there? And that led us to actually developing this self-serve product. You know, we were like, we've got this knowledge and expertise from selling Mentorloop in kind of an enterprise way. Let's package that up and deliver it in a product that, again, can be more accessible to more people, coming back to our original mission and vision and values. And that's what we've been able to do. And I think if we were to continue on that investment and raise and growth track, I'm not sure we necessarily would have had the headspace or the bandwidth to go and do that.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like if you just are the average person listening and like to this founder space, like it always feels like it's a 10x type of situation and they're growing so rapidly and that's what's so necessary. But then like when you sit back and you're like, oh, actually there's a way to do this sustainably, and you might have to choose a different route, but the route is still there. I feel like it's just not talked about enough. So thank you so much for shedding light on that.
I mean, Lisa and I still own 50%, over 50% of our company. You know, that's the other thing. So you're still a very good business growing at, 40, 50% each year, especially in this market. If you're profitable, you're like a unicorn.
Yeah. No, so true.
That's Heidi Holmes of Mentorloop. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you in the next episode.